Good evening and welcome everybody to the Sherdog Radio Network, where we are getting ready to recap UFC Fight Night 181, Hall versus Silva. The Shillin and Duffy Show. Once again, everybody scoots down one chair as our usual host, Keith Shillin, is tied up by real life. I will be your host for the evening, Ben Duffy. Joining me, I have the treat, the pleasure, and the privilege of welcoming Sherdog Associate Editor Jay Pettry. Jay, how are you doing?
You know, these kind of fight cards that they kind of deliver action from start to finish, and you have that crackling and that kind of energy. You're like, ooh, something interesting might happen here. It kind of puts me in a mood, but then of course certain fight results kind of may damper it depending who you root for. I'm looking forward to talking about what happens because there's a surprising amount to talk about from a card that only had what do you figure three or four ranked fighters period. And
3 or 4 ranked fighters if you stretch it all the way out to 15.
If you really drag it out, and that's still, and there's still interesting things like, well, I can see something here. So yeah, this should be fun.
Fantastic. In your main event, Uriah Hall made it an unpleasant goodbye for what we are assured is the final fight of the legendary Anderson Silva. We get the 4th round TKO, minute and 24 seconds. Hall drops Silva, follows him down to the ground, and you see Herb Dean, looking on, probably trying to give the legend every possible chance to recover or just make sure that he doesn't screw the pooch and that he's not the big story coming out of Anderson Silva's retirement fight. But finally, just a couple of those punches and hammer fist, you can see Silva kind of go limp. He's not offering much. The fight's over. Did the fight play out as you expected it, Jay? I mean, I know you picked Hall going in, but was this the complexion you expected?
It was until it wasn't. Like the first 2 rounds, I expected them to play out pretty much how they would. A very tense, kind of tepid, advanced, a very technical staring match between 2 very solid counter strikers. That you're like, okay, one of them at any moment could hurt the other, but I don't think they will. It's that kind of thing where Silva is 45, so some of his fast twitch and his counters may not be there like they used to be. He's not gonna to catch somebody, like that coming in like he might have in the past. And at the same time, Uriah Hall always has struck me to be the kind of guy who would be starstruck in a fight. So I approached this, and I wrote about this in the Sherdog Prime Picks article, that I expected this fight was going to go the distance because I felt that both men would be a little too reticent to finally pull the trigger, and it didn't come until the very end of the 3rd round. So 14 and a half minutes had gone by. If this were a 3-round fight, it'd be pretty much, done with, and that'd be over. But that just in sheer happenstance, it happened to be a main event, and we went on like that. And then Silva had the misfortune of, at 45 years young and a chin that may not be quite what it used to be, hands down, chin up, wade forward into the waiting arms of a counterpuncher in Hall, who's got some pop on his punches. So it delivered exactly how I thought it was going to until it didn't anymore. And then, oh no, here we go.
That's about as fair as I could say it. Now, I don't. You mentioned that you knew what the bonuses were for the evening. Did this win any?
This did not win any. In fact, the post-fight bonuses, Kevin Holland won 1 for his slam finish. Alexander Hernandez won for his finish of Chris Grutzmacher. Adrian Yanez won for his step-away head kick. And Miles Johns won for his blistering uppercut. So 4 performance of the nights, no fight of the night.
All right, fantastic. That's a little unexpected. I was kind of guessing that there were going to be 2 performance of the nights, and this one would get kind of an undeserving fight of the night.
Kind of sneak it in there, be like, hey, thanks for all the cheese.
But hey, well, that's good to know. Does this fight? Well, all right. Actually, before I even go to that, buy or sell right now. Does Anderson Silva fight in the UFC again?
Ooh. If you just said fight again, I would say yes, absolutely. Anderson Silva, I believe, had an 8-fight deal with the UFC that the UFC fully anticipated he was not going to complete, that he was going to have it And he might get 4 fights out of the way, get knocked out brutally. Everybody goes, "Oh, this is really sad." Anderson Silva turns 43, and we go, "Well, I guess that's the end of that." Well, Anderson Silva, I believe, finished his contract in this fight, and that's something the UFC didn't bank on. So the UFC is in a really precarious position that they are probably going to have to throw big money at a fighter that, if you compare him to many other fighters in the division, if you obviously Anderson Silva has the name and the legacy, but relative to recent performances dating back to 2012, you don't have that bang for your buck. So the UFC, is going to have to throw a lot of money at him to keep him. So I would say no, he will not fight again in the UFC. However, I do fully believe we will see Anderson Silva fight somebody again, whether in some fashion.
And for the record, if this was the last fight in an 8-fight deal, in those 8 fights, he is 1-6 with 1 no contest. The one win was should we call it a close one over Derek Brunson?
It was
I hate throwing out the R word.
hometown decision that wasn't his hometown. Yeah,
okay.
It was a rough one. I believe that MMA fighting would probably call robbery review on that one.
And then the no contest, of course, he beat Nick Diaz by decision. It was overturned when Diaz popped for cannabis and Silva popped for clear liquid in the blue bottle. That's right. Beyond that, we've got 6 losses. This is going to sound disrespectful to say, and I don't mean it that way at all, because I mean, I have loved watching Silva fight, win or lose, but the 6 losses could have been worse if they had not been delivered by some people that clearly were showing Silva a ton of respect. Israel Adesanya and Daniel Cormier, just to name 2, are 2 people that, I mean, those fights could have been much, much uglier, except that in Cormier's case, Silva was saving his paycheck on 3 days' notice and was just content to take him down and let Silva put him in lockdown half guard for literally a whole fight. And then Adesanya, who, kind of styled, danced, and Silva even had his few moments here and there. But I don't feel like I need to see Anderson Silva fight again. They called him dazzling on the broadcast, and I asked the question in the Sherdog Slack, when was the last time Anderson Silva dazzled you?
And it is easily Stephan Bonnar. That's the only you can't say. What do you say? Well, the first round against Weidman, no. The Nick Diaz fight, no. I mean, Nick Diaz laid on the ground like he wanted to paint him like one of his French girls. So there wasn't a dazzling performance before 2012 when a few of our staff members hadn't watched the sport yet.
Yeah, I there's the flying knee on Bisping that I would certainly the last time I got out of my seat for a positive reason during an Anderson Silva fight. But yeah, he's looking at that recent record, looking at that last 7 years of record. It's been a long, long time. I actually hope for his own sake he steps away. The UFC has not matched him soft, but like I say, these could have been worse.
And it's good you say that though, because his last 2 fights, were against Uriah Hall. He is the number 10 middleweight. Whether you agree with that ranking or not, he's a top 10 fighter on the UFC's rankings. And Jared Cannonier, I believe, when he fought Jared Cannonier, was right there too, coming up on it. Israel Adesanya, of course, short notice, blah blah blah, the Robert Whittaker thing. So yeah, you're right on that he hasn't been matched well. But at the same time, apparently, according to ESPN, he actually has 1 fight left because he had 3 fights left before Cannonier, and so he's knocked out 2 of them. So apparently, Anderson Silva does have 1 fight left on his UFC contract, according to ESPN. So then I will have to ask you this question, because I'm going to throw an audible here, because let's get weird. Who should Anderson Silva's real, super, totally awesome retirement fight be against?
Oh, man. Can Michael Bisping just rip his suit coat off and run in there and there's nothing that would be competitively appropriate that isn't insulting. What are they going to have him fight, Jack Marshman?
John Phillips is available.
See what I mean? Insulting. And oh, please.
And that's a difficult situation. We actually, some of the staff members joked about that, about Khabib will come back out of retirement after 4 days or something and take fights and end up retiring on a loss to a, season 8 of the Contender Series type of prospect, all that Father Time is undefeated, everything like that. It's tough because the division doesn't really have many aging names. It's very strange to think that I think the only other over 40-year-old at middleweight currently is Yoel Romero. And I have no interest in seeing them meet each other. I mean, then you have to go to Trevor Smith, Timbo Slice, Tim Boach, who I don't know if is still fighting anymore. And then it starts to get insulting unless you do the thing that nobody wants, but it would sell 700,000 pay-per-view buys. Who should he rematch for the third time? The Chris Weidman fight, because Chris Weidman's coming off of a win. But
I thought you were going to say Chael Sonnen. I was like,
I mean, maybe Chael. Well, Chael. I don't know if Chael's still signed with Bellator, but other than Weidman, I don't want it. I don't think we need it. But I think we might get it.
Well, let's light a little candle and hope and pray. Meanwhile, the other half of that fight is very much still active, very much still a factor in the middleweight division. And not only can you argue that at age 36, he's fighting better than he ever has, it would be hard to argue that he isn't. Uriah Hall is a guy who a couple fights out of tough, a couple fights into his UFC career, looked to me like he might be the guy that goes 500 in the UFC, is a bonus magnet, but never really breaks into contention. Instead, he's a guy who isn't that much above 500 in the UFC, is a bonus magnet, and is on the cusp of contention. What do we do with this guy next?
It's funny that I've jokingly said before a name that almost made sense to me. And I think it actually does make sense because there's a prior history there. Because the two of them fought 10 years ago in Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman and Uriah Hall met in 2010, and Weidman finished him in the first round. It's been a while since I've seen that fight, but I believe it was easy takedown, smashed him out. Yeah, it was fairly straightforward, 3 minutes, get him out of here kind of thing. But this is a very different Chris Weidman, and it seems like they've aged differently, I guess, to put it very nicely. Even though they are actually within, I think they're about a month born away from each other, so they are very closely aged. But it feels like Chris Weidman is so far beyond the pale, was Uriah Hall is a top 10 guy that could do something. If we wanted to do it legitimate and not just go silly Chris Weidman thing, because Chris Weidman, who knows what they're going to do with him, throw maybe like an Edmund Shabazian kind of guy at him. Two heavy hitters, both trying to see if they can make that push. So I think that could work for me.
That's as good as anything I can come up with. Outside of that kind of top 7 or 8 of the middleweight division, from like 7 or 8 through 15 or 20, there's a lot of bodies there that haven't fought each other. So why remake something, for silliness?
Unless we do it for posterity's sake and have Uriah Hall fight Kelvin Gastelum again.
That's an interesting fight right now, honestly. And the momentum completely the opposite of what it was 8 years ago. In fact, isn't Gastelum on a 3-fight losing streak?
It's been a good while since he's won a fight, and Uriah Hall's on a 3-fight win streak.
How about that? Your co-main event in the featherweight division, Bryce Thug Nasty Mitchell. I understand he got some special sorts or something. I don't recall. Did the UFC broadcast mention it at all?
No, I don't think I might have heard something on like ESPN the other day, but no, that there certainly wasn't, a backstage camera focusing on the fighter's crotch to show off his new shorts or anything. There was nothing like that in the broadcast.
Okay. Outstanding. Thankfully. Well, Mitchell took on Andre Fili and won a unanimous decision. felt pretty straightforward to me, even if I didn't agree with all the individual scorecards. Those scorecards were 29-28 and 230-27s in favor of the Arkansan. How did you score it?
I believe I gave the first round to Mitchell, the second to Feely, and the third round to Mitchell. I believe that was a it almost seems contentious in that two of the three official judges awarded it 30-27, which I thought the second round Feely really had the advantage. He didn't get taken down until the very end of the fight or the round. He did well. He stayed on the outside. He landed some good shots. And he did kind of what some of us expected, in that Mitchell would come out guns blazing, hit 4 or 5 takedowns in the opening round, threaten for the submission, be very, very dangerous. And then round 2 comes around and either Feely figures him out, or Mitchell lets off a little bit on the gas because it's a very high pace he puts on, or that, Feely's a crafty veteran and can kind of rise to the occasion. One of those things happened. And the second round proceeded the way he did. And then the third round happened. Well, wait a second, hold on. Now Mitchell's pushing the pace and getting and hitting mat returns after mat returns, and he's getting Mitchell down, or he's getting Feely down. Bang, bang, bang. Yeah, this was a good workmanlike, which is a funny thing to say for a guy that hits 7 or 8 takedowns in a fight over a guy that can scramble like the best of them. This was a good performance and the best name he's fought by leaps and bounds, I think.
I agree. I believe you had Mitchell in this fight. Right?
Yes, I did. I had second thoughts. I suggested that savvy bettors avoid betting on this fight because the line is very close and there's a very serious chance that Feely could spring the upset. But I inevitably thought that Mitchell's takedown game could carry him to about the 8-minute mark of the fight. And then by then he would have done enough to win the second round. And then if Feely can box him up in the third round, it's no big deal. Obviously it didn't play out like that, but yes, I did at the end of the day finally have Mitchell.
Yeah, I favored Feely going into this one. I thought he was a step up for Mitchell, and I thought he was a different challenge stylistically. I thought he'd be able to sprawl and brawl his way to at least winning, say, the second and third rounds. I was wrong, and Mitchell showed me some things that I had not previously seen from him, or if I'd seen them on less proven fighters. He's still not. I mean, he's not what you call a classic chain wrestler, like the way you learn it at wrestling camp. But his second and third effort takedowns on Feely, his mat returns when Feely was able to scramble or explode back to his feet, were really impressive. Because anytime you get a kind of a grappling savant come into the UFC as a prospect like this, the question is always, well, what's it going to look like when you face someone who has good defensive wrestling? But his takedown game has improved, and he was pretty fearless on the feet as well. I expected Feely to have the advantage on the feet, and if he had one, it was vanishingly slim. Mitchell had no fear of him right from the beginning, like gave as good as he got on the feet in the early going until he started launching the takedowns. I had not believed in him yet. I mean, my first eye-opening experience with Bryce Mitchell was the Charles Rosa fight. Just one of the more demoralizing MMA moments of the year, when you had a black belt just rendered so helpless on the ground that he was trying to goad Mitchell into letting him up and standing and banging. Not a good look. And then, this fight, I'm prepared to recognize that Bryce Mitchell might be a problem.
It's interesting because he's still very young. And this is something that we had a relatively interesting discussion among Sherdog internal staff members about how the UFC is developing Bryce Mitchell, because he is, and let me state for the record, Bryce Mitchell is 14-0. He is not 14-1. He does not have an official professional loss. His loss that he suffered to Brad Katona was in the semifinals of The Ultimate Fighter. The UFC, for some reason, counts semifinal wins and losses of tough seasons as pro wins on their record. You'll see it like Rose Namajunas and, just all the names down the line. If they win or lose in the semis, they will have a win or loss on their pro record. And my expectation is that, well, it was a 3-round fight. Now, Nevada State Athletic Commission has been very clear over the years that all these tough fights, 2 rounds or 3 rounds, are exhibitions, period, the end. They don't happen live, so there's no recording. There's no official record-keeping agency there to make sure everything is above board. Obviously, it's the UFC. We don't expect funny business, but it's a blanket policy. This is a pre-recorded fight, so it needs to be recorded and submitted to the powers that be so it can be official. So Bryce Mitchell is an undefeated fighter, and he's looked good, and I appreciate the way that the UFC has been bringing him up, because there's oftentimes that for some reason a fighter will get a good win, an impressive win, a statement win, and the UFC will be like, hey, let's let him fight X top 10 fighter. Like, timeout, let's build him up. Like, I fully expected when he hit the twister on Matt Sales, they were going to throw him up the division and make him fight Cub Swanson or something. It's just that kind of situation where you figure an impressive performance, a cool, fantastic thing, a performance of the night. Wow, let's see this guy, and he's got a personality, and he likes those dumb shorts that everybody's crazy about. So hey, let's push this guy. And to put him against Andre Fili, who is a very tough out. I mean, he has, I think it's a 9-7 record in the UFC, but his losses are to legit guys. Yair Rodriguez, Calvin Kattar, Michael Johnson when he's on. Sadiq Youssef is a very interesting talent. Some kid named Max Holloway. So he's fought some great names, and he's also, when he's on, he can do great things. Like what he did to Dennis Bermudez was spectacular, which I had Bermudez winning that fight, going away, and it wasn't the case. So I'm glad the UFC is treating him this way. I like this kind of build-up, but I am very curious what your thoughts on how the UFC should push him and matchmake him and sell him. Make him is not just X-ranked fighter, but look at those pants he has. Look at this. Look at all the things. Like how's the UFC package and push him going forward?
I don't know what they will do. I'm kind of surprised they haven't given him the Chimaev treatment yet. So pleasantly surprised. I'm now asking myself, do I want to see Bryce Mitchell next against a top 15 or, border of the top 15 type fighter? He can't take a step back from Fili because he won uncontroversially. Like even, you and I both seem to think he won 2 out of 3 rounds. That seems to be kind of the consensus as I was scrolling MMA Twitter during and after the fight. So he can't take a step back from Fili because it was a legit win. And for what it's worth, Fili looked fine. It's not like he beat like weirdly compromised or gun shy Andre Fili. Like Andre Fili did what I expected him to do, and it just wasn't enough. So do I want to see him against a Josh Emmett or Shane Burgos? Do I want to see him against, a Dan Ige type? Because my instant thought is that, the same thing I thought about Andre Fili. So maybe I'm wrong again. I'm like, well, no, Dan Ige would shuck off the takedowns and bust him up on the feet. But that's what I thought Andre Fili would do. So he needs to step up. Here he was in a co-main event while this was a pretty thin card. Nonetheless, this would have been at least main card material on most Fight Night cards. Yeah, I like him against, an Emmett, Burgos, Ige type. Maybe Cub Swanson now.
Maybe Cub Swanson now. I don't know what Cub Swanson's up to. I know that things have changed in Gradder's hair, which was interesting to see. But, it's funny because the UFC... I believe he is a very newly ranked top number 15 guy. I don't believe he was ranked more than maybe a month out from this fight. So it feels like ranking is on the basis of promotional purposes rather than what has he done, because I don't believe, he beat Charles Rosa in May, and I believe he was ranked, this summer. So it wasn't look, he beat this guy and was pushed up there. So the funny thing is, The next name ahead of him, the number 14 ranked featherweight, is Edson Barboza. Do you want to see that fight? I don't want to see that fight. I feel like even though they're closely ranked, I feel like that kind of fight wouldn't make sense to me. I mean, even though Edson Barboza put the screws to Makwan Amirkhani the other week, I feel like that's an odd matchup. But there are a couple that I really would be interested in seeing. One of which is a potential card-saving fight. Arnold Allen lost his opponent. He was going to fight Jeremy Stevens. Arnold Allen needs a short notice replacement. Bryce Mitchell said on the post-fight interview, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's do the thing. I got the thing. Let's go." I don't believe he called anybody out. If he did, I'm sure I'll be made aware. But that could be interesting. Okay, slot him in short notice, see if you can hack it. Or Ryan Hall. What if we put Ryan Hall against a good grappler?
Oh my
Because
goodness.
I love BJ Penn more than most things, but BJ Penn in 2018 that falls into a heel hook is not the grappler that I would put against Ryan Hall. But I think that because Ryan Hall was supposed to fight in August and got injured, I believe his recovery timetable was a couple months. So a December, January fight, Ryan Hall, Bryce Mitchell, bottom rung of top 15. What do you think about that?
I absolutely love that. That's there. I don't want anything else. You know, I want, yep, Ryan Hall versus Bryce Mitchell.
Just
I
the
love
race
that.
to the race to the twister.
Yeah.
The 50. I mean, you can almost do a card around it, like a grappling UFC heavy grappling card, and be like, UFC 50-50 or something.
UFC 50-50. All right, let's move down. Let's move down the card. We had heavyweights on the main card. Greg, Prince of War Hardy, who narrowly avoided being the first heavyweight to miss weight in UFC history, got past Maurice Green, won the first round, put him away in the second under a hail of hammer fists and punches. Green was squirming around, rolling around, immediately protested as soon as Herb Dean stopped the fight. I guess, first of all, how'd you feel about the stoppage?
I feel like it could have gone on longer. I know that I could see the exact moment where Herb Dean thought it's over when Maurice Green was on his knees and Hardy was kind of like standing on top of he was standing up riding a horse, kind of punching down at him, and then Maurice Green kind of rolled over his left shoulder to try and get better position, and Herb Dean thought, oh, he's flopping over, he's done, he's a fainting goat, he's out. So I can understand where Herb Dean saw that and saw Maurice Green and thought he was splayed out. Because Greg Hardy was drilling him in the side of the head with, there were some Donkey Kong style hammer fists, but, he's a 290-pound heavyweight. Like, this is a guy that cuts a significant amount of weight to get down to heavyweight, which I made clear on Friday that Greg Hardy was this close to becoming the first UFC heavyweight to ever miss weight because 266.5 is over the threshold. So Greg Hardy has lunch boxes, blah, blah, football player, blah, blah, hitting things. He's got all that past behind him. The UFC has a very interesting thing to figure out how to handle him, because on the broadcast, Michael Bisping called Greg Hardy a rookie. I get conceptually that Greg Hardy is a rookie in the mixed martial arts scheme of things because his MMA debut was in 2018. Professional MMA debut was in 2018 on the Contender Series. So he's been in the sport for 2.5 years. But this was his 10th fight. He's a 10-fight veteran. He has had more cage experience than many fighters that the UFC seems to pick up these days. Like, you look at a Justin Tafa, who's 4-0, 4-1 now. He's a rookie. But the UFC feels like it needs to explain itself. And then you add to the fact that Herb Dean has to warn Greg Hardy, hey man, don't gouge his eyes when you're on top of him. Like, come on, man. Greg, because I wrote about that in the Sherdog play-by-play, how he was holding Green down with his hands, kind of pushing at his face, and working on that way. I don't know. I feel weird even wanting to think about matchmaking him because, I know that the UFC is going to fast track him and put him on You know, they're gonna try and send him up the ranks, but whatever. Give him like a tie to Avasa, and then we can shrug our shoulders and be done with it. Are you over the whole thing, or you have a different thought than I do?
Well, I mean, leaving aside all the outside the cage things,
Yes,
which
of
have
course.
been, you know,
I mean, you can.
gone over ad infinitum by me more than by most people, I'm kind of over waiting for him to develop into something in the cage. As you point out, he is at this point a 10-fight veteran, and he's still having to be told the rules of MMA between rounds in some way or another. It seems like every other fight. He has some incredible, difficult to match natural physical tools. I mean, I was sitting 15 feet away. We were just talking about hammer fists and lunchboxes when he essentially put away Juan Adams with nothing but hammer fists to the side of the head. You know, Adams had a single leg. Hardy pancaked it, hit him in the side of the head, you know, at not a good mechanical angle to generate power until Adams fell dead. Like he has incredible power. But he is, I mean, he was sucking wind in a ghastly manner by the time this fight was over. Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of time anymore. When he got into the UFC, my thought was whether I think he belongs here or not in like a, you know, an ethical sense, in an athletic sense, once this guy catches on, he is going to be a serious problem. And I don't know that anymore. You know, he beat Jorgen De Castro half because De Castro just kind of wilted. I still think Jorgen De Castro could have won that fight, and the UFC would be throwing their hands up, wondering what to do with Hardy right now. But nonetheless, he wins. I mean, he is 2 in a row now, for the second time officially. And the whole thing about the UFC heavyweight division, you know, that I've harped on a few times is anybody is only 4 fights away from a title shot. There's just so few people. And so many of the good ones have already fought each other multiple times that if you're a new guy that pops into the UFC and you win 4 fights, you're on the doorstep of title contention. And I don't know if Greg Hardy is ready for a top 10 heavyweight, but I think it's entirely possible he gets one next.
Yeah, and the UFC kind of forced that. I believe it was a short notice situation.
The Volkov
when
fight,
they
yeah.
threw him in Volkov, and we went, well, yeah, what did you expect? I mean, honestly, that was probably one of the easiest picks. That, you know, Volkov is one of those few heavyweights that fights long very well. More than anything, there's a storyline that I don't know if you're aware of this, and it kind of snuck into the narrative of this conversation, is that Monkikawa, his manager, mentioned that the fight was canceled or nearly canceled hours before it took place. His tweet midway during the broadcast said, "And to think that fight was almost canceled 2 hours ago. Congrats, Greg Hardy." So there are some real questions what the heck that means, because it's very vague, and of course, obviously, it was never answered and followed up on, and it's going to just float away into the ether. But this is kind of one of those things you kind of want to ask about, because what does that mean? Was there an injury? Was there something happen? Did Maurice Greene slip on a pipe backstage and knock himself out? Something happened? I don't know. And here's the thing. I feel like Greg Hardy in his mixed martial arts career has run out of free passes, that especially undeserved free passes, to explain things and explain how this happens and how we get away with it, because of the disqualification loss, because of the no contest, because he broke a rule, because of the other fouls, because of him gouging the eyes just in this fight. And I don't know what we're going to do with it. But until the UFC gives him kind of puts him up against guys that he gets beaten by, we're probably going to be dealing with him in the roster, which I say that because he's obviously a very high paid fighter. Like, he is making more than the rest of the fighters. So to have a guy that will make, we don't know the money anymore. The UFC doesn't disclose the salaries in Nevada anymore, but he makes a pretty penny. So they almost have to put him against big guys in big fights. So what are you going to do, Walt Harris?
When they first signed him, I think it was 80 and 80.
Something crazy.
Yeah.
Something like Sage Northcutt will be like, wait, you're not paying me that much? It was a very high amount.
Yeah. Is there anybody in the top 15 that you would favor him against? Or even like think he had a decent chance? Like Walt Harris just barely fought. Does Walt Harris punch him out?
Yes, I think that Walt Harris. No, actually, I think Walt Harris would head kick him. Actually, I think that would probably happen because he hasn't really dealt with that. He got stunned on. He blocked one of Maurice Green's head kicks and had a moment where it's like, whoa, where the heck did that come from? I think I can't ever trust Marcin Tybura to show up, and he's a top 15 guy right now. But other than that, I think, yeah, I think that I would favor basically the remainder of the heavyweight division to beat him, and you wonder when the UFC is going to have to start trying to get a return on investment. I mean, okay, I take it back. Alexei Oleinik is 40 something years old. His chin is not what it used to be, and he likes to get into firefights that he shouldn't and falls down. He could have beaten Alistair Overeem, but then he got tired trying to punch the guy out. So yeah, I think that Greg Hardy could beat Alexei Oleinik, and I don't want to think about it because, you know,
Yeah,
then what do
you'll
you
wish
do?
it into existence.
Because then Greg Hardy's a top 10 guy if he beats a top 10 Alexei Oleinik, and no.
Well, I think one way or the other, the Greg Hardy experiment phase is just about over. You know, I don't know how many more fights he'll be in the UFC for, but he doesn't have many more to really point to which way it's going. You know, to whether it's all right, let's just let this guy fight out his contract, because I mean, somebody would sign him if they dropped him.
Well, it's going to sound, I don't mean any disrespect to the fighters on the roster, but he's about run out of fighters of that tier of the heavyweight division that he's going to have to really struggle unless they put him up against a Rocky Martinez. And then we're going to go, okay, that's silly. Or a Justin Tafa, who is fighting, I think he's fighting Carlos Felipe soon. So he's kind of at the end of that rope there. So I think you're right. That experiment is going to have to turn and develop. And the UFC is going to start have to harvest it soon, or what? I don't know.
All right, continuing to move down the main card. Kevin takes on fellow Texan who steps up on short notice, Charlie Ontiveros. So you've got the, I believe, Dallas native versus the Houstonian. Back and forth fight, mostly one-way traffic. Holland is getting the better of it when he slams Ontiveros to the ground, and it takes a few seconds of chaos before we figure out what's going. It doesn't help that the booth is yelling out 15 different things that is not what is happening or what has happened. But the TKO by verbal submission after the slam goes the way of Kevin Holland. I mean, other than obviously the result itself, which is rather freakish, was there anything about this fight that surprised you?
I was a little surprised at how interested Holland was to be like, yeah, let's take this fight down and beat him that way. Because I think of Holland as the guy who, kind of dealt with the rampaging bull that was Joaquin Buckley before Joaquin Buckley became whatever he is now. I don't really know. I mean, this is a guy who walked down Anthony Fluffy Hernandez and went, I'm going to knee you and we're done here. So in that regard, I'm kind of surprised, but at the same time, we've seen in very recent memory this weekend a very highly skilled kickboxer say, "Well, I can just take you down and destroy you, or big brother you. Why the heck would I bother that?" In Gegard Mousasi Douglas Lima, but that's a different event. Other than that, I was surprised at his ability to slam and get the amplitude, because that's not a thing you can, you'd have to really very particularly train for that. Like it's one thing to take a guy down to set it up how they do. It's another to lift them up and just whip them down to the ground and apparently finish them that way. So this is not an accident. And that's what makes it so interesting for me. This is a wrinkle in the game that makes me look at Kevin Holland and go, well, he's yelling at Israel Adesanya in the crowd, and obviously I don't want to see that fight. But what if Kevin Holland strings together a couple wins? If he develops a game that's well-rounded enough, maybe in 2 years, I'm very curious about this guy.
And I thought it was a brilliant strategy on his part. I am, of course, from Houston. I've I've been to Charlie's gym. I've seen, at least his last 4 or 5 fights in person. He is somebody that has authored some of the most terrifying knockouts that I've seen at any level of the sport, and on decent opponents. And Holland is another guy from Texas. I'm sure he and his camp know all about Ontiveros. Ontiveros, said in the lead up, I figured Holland and I were going to meet sometime in Texas before we even got to this level. I think Holland looked at this and said, well, it may not be super likely that he can nail me with a head kick or take like a 10-foot running jump and knee me in the chin, but I know he definitely can't do it if he's on his back, and he almost certainly can't do it if he's worried about being put on his back. Because they had a couple of pretty testy exchanges in the first 30 seconds. Ontiveros came right at him. But
with an axe kick, by the way.
With an axe kick.
I'm pretty sure the first strike that Ontiveros threw was an axe kick, because what a way to make your debut.
Hey, go big.
Heck yeah.
But that was out the window once Holland got him to the ground the first time. And I think it was brilliant. He took the path of least resistance. He took the path of lowest risk. It was still an exciting fight. That was one of the more eye-popping moments of the evening for me, even before it caused the injury that ended the fight. I was like, I can't believe he's just slamming this dude all over the place. So yeah, excited for what Holland does next. And obviously, I will be excited to see Ontiveros presumably get his shot on a real camp at his real weight, because there are some 170 pounders in the UFC that he could put a highlight finish on. I want to at least see him get his chance.
Well, maybe he could fight Reese McKee. That guy needs another fight.
Oh. See, I would have Ontiveros all day in that one, and I'd start making out the check. Continuing to move down the main card of UFC Fight Night, Hall versus Silva, we had Bobby Green taking on Thiago Moises in a lightweight matchup. Green, he was attempting to become the first fighter to win 4 fights in the UFC this year. Did not happen for him. Holland became the first in the fight immediately afterwards. Did Green versus Moises play out like you expected?
Yeah, actually, it did. It really did. Obviously, the notion that would probably go 3 full rounds and we get to see a lot of game would be interesting. On our own show, Unleashed, I hyped up this particular fight, because I felt like it would play out in several ways, and then Bobby Green may lose the first round. He might play around a little bit, then get his bearings, and then fight off an odd submission and basically point fingers and make funny faces at Thiago Moises for trying to pull it on him, and then get out of danger and box his way to a decision. And the scorecard, I personally scored the first round for Moises and the second and third for Green. I understand that the first round could have been a Bobby Green round, and the third round could have been a Moises round. And it was a close fight, which is odd, because if you look at the stats, Bobby Green doubled him up and significant strikes landed. But it's all about how they used and everything like that. The third round in particular, there's a lot to look at, because Thiago Moises hit it. He almost hit a takedown, got Bobby Green down to one knee, had kind of pushed him down and controlled him for the good part of 90 seconds. And I can see that making an impact when the rest of the round is relatively close, striking and otherwise. So it did. It played out like I did. It didn't go the way the scorecard didn't go the way I expected. Because, let's be honest, Bobby Green actually literally doubled the output in the first and second and third rounds in terms of significant strikes landed. Strike totals aren't the whole story, but 26-13, 29-14, and 30-15 on UFC stats official numbers. That is a literally doubling up, and yet he didn't quite get the decision, because it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because, of course, Michael Bisping made a point of talking about punch stats later on the same card tonight, where he said he said that he hated them because a punch that like rocks a guy and changes the whole complexion of the round and of the fight counts the same as just a shot that lands. But even by the eyeball test, I gave 2 rounds to Green in this one. I'm looking at MMAdecisions.com. I didn't score things officially tonight, so I'm not on there. But I see 4 people that scored it for Moises and 11 that scored it for Green among the media. The ones who scored it for Moises include some sharp people: Matt Wells, Steve Duncan, Dane Fox, and Adam Martin. So no disrespect to any of those guys, but I mean, clearly it was at least controversial. I was surprised that it went unanimously to Moises.
Yes.
And for the record, we've had the conversation before that Bobby Green has floated around the top 3 of my Scream at the TV fighters list. He's really worked his way off there this year, and this fight was a continuation of that. I thought he fought to his best advantage in all 3 rounds in all the situations he found himself in, and I mean, he did some talking and some pointing, but no pointless showboating. There was a time when Bobby Green would have like sat and pointed and hit and just landed stupid hammer fists while Moises finished that ankle lock. But instead he defended himself well. So I didn't completely agree with the decision, but both guys came out of it looking pretty good.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of a stock up on both metrics fight. I think that they both had good performances. Moises got the win, but Bobby Green didn't get the loss, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't see that he looks worse having dropped a very close, contentious decision to a relatively highly touted Brazilian Contender Series guy. I mean, granted, there's bigger Contender Series names, Moreno Rodriguez and Johnny Walker, to name a few. But it was almost a Bobby Green fight. Like, it almost was that. But then you saw moments where you saw him push past like that when Moises set up the ankle lock, and you could see him frantically getting his way out of it, fighting out, turning, stepping over the right way instead of screwing around and be like, "You got nothing on me," which I actually had joked in my own little breakdown was that would be something Bobby Green would do, to be like, "You got nothing," and then maybe he'd get trapped. Yeah, it was a Bobby Green 2.0 fight. And if he fights like that, I'm looking forward to his fights. And that's not something I used to say a long time ago.
Do you believe in Thiago Moises? He is 3-2 in the UFC right now. Mm-hmm. His losses are to Beneil Dariush, who is a top 10 quality guy.
Yep.
And Damir Ismagulov, who I don't think he's actually undefeated, but he's been undefeated since like the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, it's been a few minutes. Ismagulov he's a very interesting cat. I'm curious to see what him. It's the problem with Thiago Moises, he's a lightweight, and there are about 120 lightweights on the UFC roster. I only believe I'm exaggerating by a very small number. I think there are actually maybe anywhere between 110 to 100 and change. So it is the deepest division, along with welterweight, in terms of total roster numbers. So that is inherently his biggest problem, is that it was a good win over a good name, but by leaps and bounds, the Michael Johnson win was more significant because he tapped out a guy who had done some great things in the past and had, beaten a couple shocking names, and we scream at the TV when he beat him. But Thiago Moises, I believe in him. Okay. I believe that he belongs on the UFC roster. He is absolutely a UFC fighter. He's a UFC winner. He's not a ranked or even remotely in the conversation for rankings, but he's a respectable name that we'll see for a while. And I think that's not every fighter is going to be the champion. Not every fighter is going to be the top 5. So I think there's a place for fighters like that who are names that are going to be around a long time. Francisco Trinaldo is another type of name who's going to be there till the bitter end. And he'll put on some impressive performance. He'll have some stinkers. He'll be there. Gleison Tibau. He'll just kind of float on and do his thing. So I think he's earned that. And I think that's just fine.
And it's such a big fish tank at 155 that there's always the chance that he'll pull like the Rafael dos Anjos thing, and you'll just realize, oh, wait a minute, this guy has won like 9 of his last 10, hasn't he? Oh, all of a sudden he's in the title picture.
And it'll just happen. And that's the thing.
Yep.
He'll fight like the Armin Sarukians, he'll fight the Alex De Silvas, the Kyle Worthies. He'll be like, wait a second, how did that happen? That could easily happen in 2 years.
That wraps up the 5-fight main card of UFC Fight Night 181. Moving down to the prelims, we stay in the lightweight division. We have Alexander Hernandez taking on Chris Gritzmacher, who was back for the first time in 2 years, a little over, a little under. A little over. Yeah, because the last time Gritzmacher fought was the really sad fight where he just beat up Joe Lozon and just made me sad and made me question all my life choices. Hernandez blew through Gritzmacher in about a minute and a half. Tell me when I'm wrong, Jay, but this was Hernandez's most impressive performance since he kind of walked through Beneil Dariush, whom we just mentioned. And obviously Dariush, much higher level of competition to do this against, but that's the kind of thing a really explosive, aggressive fighter does when he arrives in the UFC and the rest of the division doesn't know what they're dealing with yet. This, considering where Hernandez is competitively, it's right behind it for me as kind of the most important win of his career so far.
It's funny to think that how few wins Alexander Hernandez has, that, you know, of any note, of any significance. Like, he won on the LFA before getting the UFC shot, but he only has 4 wins in the UFC. Now, 2 of his wins are blistering, fantastic wins. The Olivier Aubin-Mercier win, I remember they fought, and I remember he won, but there is no real lasting memory of that fight. When in comparison, you have the Francisco Trinaldo debacle. I guess we can put that very mildly in whatever happened between those two.
Oof.
But his 2 losses are to very respectable names. At the time, Donald Cerrone was that he still had that magic about him. Cerrone did, and Cerrone brought him down to his pace and booted him in the head and got the win. And Drew Dober, who has become something. So this performance for Alexander Hernandez was the performance he was supposed to have against a guy in Chris Gritz, who has tried to find his place since the Ultimate Fighter. I believe it was the Conor Faber season, U.S. top 22. Anyway, his season of the Ultimate Fighter, and we saw him get tapped out, and then we saw him get tapped out, and we went, okay, what are we going to do? Then the Joe Lozon situation, and then he was away for longer than Sean Strickland, who we'll talk about in a little bit. This is what Hernandez needed to do to stay relevant, because at one time Hernandez was a top 15 lightweight, whether that's, obviously on the heels of the Dariush win, but this is what he needs to do. As we just talked about, Moises making an impression, and he didn't, and he beat a guy and it was respectable. This is what you need to do to stand out from the pack. So yes, I think this is the performance that he needed so desperately. No,
like perfect. He looked hot enough after those first 2 wins, the Dariush and Aubin-Mercier fights, that he was the betting favorite against Donald Cerrone.
Mm-hmm.
And Cerrone just kind of tapped the brakes on this, said, no. There are levels to this. Yep. Welcome to the UFC. Now we have tape on you. But we just talked about what a deep pond this is. If you do want to stand out from that pack, this is what you do to just another roster guy. Hernandez just, I think I commented in the Sherdog Slack for this fight, this might be the greatest disparity in hand speed I've seen in the UFC fight outside of heavyweight.
It was so fast. That just boom, 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 put 3 shots on him before Gritz could even turn to him. Yeah.
And I mean, unfair to blame Gritzmacher for this, considering he was dinged up, probably feeling a little overwhelmed at the time. But the way he just went sliding along the fence to his right, just, I mean, if more people did that in an 8-sided cage, like, Cro Cop would have been better off in the UFC. Yeah, he just walked right into the left high kick, and that was all she wrote. You did say that Hernandez won one of the performance bonuses of the night for this one, right?
Yeah, Hernandez did win for his flurry. There wasn't a head kick. That might have been in the other fight that we're going to talk about. That's another good one to talk about. Don't worry.
I'm clipping that out.
We're going to rock and roll.
Oh, dang it. All right, we've already talked about this fight longer than it went on. Let's move down to the fight I was thinking about.
That's a fun one.
and
That performance was another very, very impressive display of hand speed and getting in and getting out of the range and watching a guy blitz past you. Sorry, I'm cutting you off, but this was that example of, oh wow, we got ourselves a guy here.
Yeah, this is the one I was thinking about, and hopefully either Adrian Yanez does not listen to the show or forgets about this before the next time I see him. But Adrian Yanez, his first fight off of one of the star turns of this season of Dana White's Contender Series, just given how emotional his story was and then how sensational his performance. But standout in both Legacy Fighting Alliance and Fury Fighting Championship, makes his official Octagon debut against Victor Rodriguez and ices him with a head kick at 2 minutes and 46 seconds of the first round. What are your takeaways from this? I mean, you've already said a little bit. This is what you do, but
this is, well, Chris Gritz, when he knocked out, or when he got knocked out, Alexander Hernandez made that statement of this is what you do. Adrian Yanez, for a debuting guy, granted it was against another newcomer with a record that is a little questionable, in that the UFC touts him as 7-2. But there's a few early knockout wins on his record that are virtually unverifiable from the old days, which is the old ancient days of 2012 when there were still video cameras and camera phones and every other way to keep track of this. But I digress. This was the kind of statement performance in under 3 minutes to bust up an opponent who is known as a knockout artist, which that is a very important thing to do. To fight a guy at their best game, to say I can not only beat this guy at his best game, but I can starch him and put him flat against just down to the ground. That's it. He freezes up. It was very impressive that Rodriguez tried, and he played the bull to Yanez's matador a few times, and then and then Yanez found his mark, and he had some sort of like a tracking device in his right hand, and bang, and he brought it back, and he circled out, and bang, and hit it about 4 or 5 times, and just totally rattled Rodriguez. And that was one of those development, like, I figured you out. Like, you're kind of pointing at him, go, I got you now. And he busted him up, and then let him circle out on the outside, and then what happened? How did it end?
It ended, and I feel so dumb for getting this one mixed up, but yeah, Rodriguez just sliding directly a straight line along the fence to his right, runs right into a head kick, and that was it, like dead. One of the most impressive finishes on a night full of them, and yeah, Yanez looked great. I know that this was a relatively late replacement, but for the record, he was going to face Aaron Phillips. I think he puts away Aaron Phillips in similarly impressive fashion.
By how he looked, I think he could have taken out a lot of guys with this performance, because I doubt he changed up his style and his game plan for anything. He was going to strike with him. He was going to bang with him. He was going to try and kick him in the face. And good Lord, he did.
Yeah. And Yanez has a high ceiling. I'm not the type to proclaim a fighter a future top 10 talent after one UFC fight, but I've seen a lot of Yanez's fights, including all 3 of his losses. And all 3 of his losses, well, Miles Johns, whom we'll be talking about in a minute, Domingo Pilarte, who at least has had several cups of coffee in the UFC, both of those split decisions, and then Levi Miles, who is, of course, the Dernweight champion of LFA, as a very talented fighter who sometimes has issues on the scale. Yanez has a very high ceiling. So, yeah, excited for his next fight. Anything else to say about this one?
If we're lucky and he gets his wish, and here's the thing. The UFC is in a very interesting time of the pandemic, and the UFC is desperately trying to fill cards. Adrian Yanez sounded like he was ready to fight next week. So, what's Casey Kenny up to? Let's go. It's that kind of thing where if the UFC is intent on riding hot streaks and striking while the iron's hot, and all the other metaphors that can be used and analogies can be used to push a fighter, go with the hot hand. Go, you get Giannis, who does a spectacular thing, no damage. He had a great win on the Contender Series in August. So yeah, let's go. I am on board with the UFC, not rushing fighters, but scheduling them to be like, let's put 3 together, let's put 4 together this year. So yeah, I'm wanting to see Giannis again, maybe in December. Why not?
Beautiful. Moving down the card, we had the return of Sean Strickland, another man who's been away from the sport for a while, and he took on the Welsh paratrooper. I know that because, well, the UFC never ceases from saying it, and also Marshman has a Welsh flag on his overlay chyron and has paratroopers tattooed on himself. So it's a nice cheat sheet for someone like me who has trouble keeping track of the 600 fighters on UFC roster. They fought at the catch weight of 187.5 pounds since Marshman missed the middleweight limit. Strickland wins a straightforward and, in my opinion, fairly one-sided unanimous decision. How'd you feel about this one, Jay?
I like this fight not just because I got to see what Strickland really looks like at middleweight, which is an important thing. This is a guy coming off of over, I don't know, it's almost exactly a 2-year layoff because it was last time he fought was in October 2018. It is almost exactly a 2-year layoff when he busted up Nordine Taleb and had a Frank Mir style motorcycle accident that very nearly ended his career. Lost part of his kneecap. It was a whole mess. The UFC broadcast was more than happy to share some of the details. This is a guy that when I heard what happened back when he went down, I thought, well, that's probably a wrap on Sean Strickland. I hope he walks again. This was a devastating accident. And here we go in 2020. And he is fighting maybe as good as he's fought since he busted up Alex Garcia a long time ago. This is a guy who he's still young, which is so strange to me because you think of guys that are having long layoffs, there must be 34, 35. Dude's 29. And he's now moving up to a division where some wondered, well, what's he going to look like up a division? He's going to be small compared to the guy. Meanwhile, he towers over Jack Marshman, who's a filled up 185er, and did the damn thing. His boxing was so crisp. His jab was just everything you wanted it to be. You watch technical boxing matches in the UFC. This is one to point to about the fundamentals of a good, solid left jab. Just bang, bang. You can everything about it. He disrupted Marshman because Marshman's the kind of guy who likes to wind up and throw bombs. He's has a couple knockouts on his credit because of just throwing bombs, and Strickland wouldn't have it. And it got to the point, and this is the best part of the fight for me, when Strickland started feeling himself and he started getting into it and he started saying words, because it's not very often when fighters say much to their opponent. And this is a guy who is coaching his opponent. This is a guy who is encouraging his opponent. Sean Strickland was saying, come on, Jack, throw a full hit me harder. And that made it more enjoyable to me because I could see that Marshman was trying a little harder, not just out of shame that always trash talking me, but because he was really throwing harder at when Strickland said full power and talking about that. So this was a good performance for Strickland, and this is a memorable one, maybe more because of his antics in the cage than his actual victory.
I agree, and I'm normally someone who can take or leave the antics in the cage, except when they actually, when I feel they teach me something about what's really going on. Oh, I talked a little while ago about Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. We're in the third round. He's being big brothered by Mitchell, and he's just basically trying to taunt him into letting him up so they can go back to striking. And that just, what a helpless feeling that must have been to be a BJJ black belt and be reduced to that. Similarly, like Strickland, by the end of the fight where he's like, come on, I'll give you a chance to win. Just let's do it. Swing hard. It didn't feel like taunting. Like it felt joyous. Like Strickland was clearly having the time of his life and just he wanted the fight to be better, which in that moment, he's all of us. But yeah, fantastic comeback for Sean Strickland. Physically, he looks fine at 185 to me. Certainly, there will be people he gives up muscle mass and bulk to, but so does everybody else in that division, including the champion. So, like.
Well, I guess it's good for the I guess it's good for Sean Strickland that he won't have to worry about fighting Israel Adesanya soon, because in a bit of news that we're going to not talk about more than me saying it, Dana White has declared that Israel Adesanya is moving up to fight Jan Blachowicz at 205 pounds for the title. So that gives more time for Sean Strickland to develop his craft in middleweight without having to worry about a specter looming over the division.
Well, all right. I mean, that certainly makes me excited to talk about the first 3 fights on this card. All right, let's move on down to the welterweight division. And our worst weight offender of the evening on a night where there was some competition for that title, Jason Witt takes on Cole Williams. The Vanilla Gorilla Witt takes on Williams, who missed weight. He missed the non-title limit by 4.5 pounds. He came in at 175.5, and Witt just put the screws to him. Dominant first round where he put him on the ground and just beat hell out of him. Was it that round that he opened him up and he was already bleeding pretty good by the fresh octagon canvas at that time, so you can tell when a dude's bleeding. And then second round, same as the first, but he ends up putting him away with an arm triangle choke. And I was surprised that he managed to tap. I thought he had waited too long and he was just going to be asleep. Any surprises? Any big takeaways from this fight for you, Witt versus Williams?
One particular thing, and it was at the beginning of the second round, when you thought, okay, maybe Witt may have burned his gas tank. There's all these questions when a guy gets a dominant 10-8 round and he's on top and he's ripping ground and pound and he's trying to finish the fight and he's doing a whole lot. Did that fighter burn his gas tank? Because he was trying to win his first UFC bout. So you had the question, and then the guy who got cut and lost the 10-8 round comes out of his corner grinning, smiling, and throwing big shots. You're like, well, maybe the tide's going to have to turn here. And then Witt picks him up. Well, he shoots in from pretty far away, picks him up, and Matt Hugheses him.
Oh yeah,
and that he lifted him up, carried him, ran towards his corner, and slammed the guy down hard. And then it was academic from there.
And slammed him down hard because Sean Shirk would do the same thing, but he'd put you down like you were his teammate.
He'd set you down.
Matt Hughes was trying to spear you like an NFL like safety.
Yeah.
Like I was honestly a bit surprised that Williams wasn't hurt, didn't have his ribs or something hurt, like just by the takedown, which you see that happen from time to time.
Like tonight, earlier or later on in the night when a slam finished a fight.
Yep. I'm thinking about Witt right now. He lost his UFC debut over the summer. Takashi Sato blew him out in under a minute. He turns 34 in a couple of weeks, or turns 34 in a week. So, kind of a classic Midwestern late bloomer. Completely unsurprising that he's coached by James Krause. The only more perfect example of kind of like that journeyman turned contender type guy that I can think of might be Mike Pyle.
Just checks all the boxes.
Yeah, checks all the boxes where I thought I knew this guy, and then at 35, all of a sudden he's a different fighter. I probably won't have to worry about it because even more so than lightweight, welterweight is the division where you have to win 5 or 6 in a row even to get a sniff of the top 15, unless your name is Khamzat Chimaev.
Yeah, seriously.
But I now remember Jason Witt's name, and I will remember it the next time he fights, whereas I had to look back and be reminded, oh, right, he's the guy that fought Sato.
Honestly, that's all you can ask for your first UFC win, to be a memorable enough one where you go, okay, I'll be interested to see this guy again, because there's too many welterweights, and there's no he could win 5 fights and he would be on the prelims. So yeah, good for you, Jason Witt. If you can keep it going and do the darn thing and do the James Krause rebirth, let's do it. I'm good with that.
As am I. That brings us down to the second fight of the night. Yet another Houstonian stepping into the cage. Yet another Houstonian for whom it was not his night, as Justin Ledet took on the returning Dustin Jacoby, and Jacoby blew him out. I mean, the end came officially with just a nice straight to uppercut combo, but what really started the ball rolling downhill were some leg kicks, that took Ledet off his feet and had him not even favoring the leg. There's sometimes where you can tell it hurts. He switches stances. He favors the leg. No, just after the second or third hard leg kick, Ledet could barely stand up anymore. This thing was over. You've probably put more thought into this fight than most other people I know. Did this look like you thought it would look?
It did, because Justin Ledet, he kind of burst onto the scene, and then if you really look at it, well, he fought a couple heavyweights, and then he dropped down to light heavyweight, and it didn't at all work for him. And this is the guy that got put out by Johnny Walker with the spinning back fist. Remember that? So he's on a long losing streak. But Dustin Jacoby, this is what he needed. This is exactly what he needed. This is a guy that made his UFC debut in 2011. He is just an old salt in the fight game in terms of how long he's been around in the major circuits, because he went from the UFC. He was on WSO. He was on World Series of Fighting's first event. He did a couple Bellators, and he went to Glory Kickboxing where he really honed his skills. Let me tell you, I say K1 Jacoby, even though I actually meant Glory Jacoby, but it's easier to say K1 Kickboxer. K1 Jacoby has some very interesting skills and talent to bring this division, because he made his UFC debut in 2011. As I said, dude's 32. So he isn't a spent force coming back at 39 years old trying to Glover to share his way up the division. Now, I don't want to be too excited about it, because Justin Ledet is, he's a UFC veteran. It's a good win over a UFC veteran. Honest and truly, I was more hyped up about just Dustin Jacoby's return when he went into what's called the Sparta Combat League King of Sparta Series, which is an unusual regional event that takes place with the Sparta Combat League promotion in Colorado. And what they do is they have an 8-man tournament, and they have the first round of the tournament is kickboxing. The second round of the tournament is boxing, and the finals is a mixed martial arts fight. So Dustin Jacoby won 3 fights to become the King of Sparta. So that was more interesting to me. But long story short, I'm curious what the UFC is going to do to him, because I feel like they're going to throw him to the wolves, because light heavyweight is not the kind of division where you can have a big stand-up performance and coast for a little and build yourself up. There's not really a build-up point for light heavyweight. So he is... I'd be fine seeing him fight William Knight. I'd be fine seeing him fight Alexa Kamer. Just a couple of those guys. Maybe if you want to have Ike Villanueva, I think he's got to fight though, so I don't think he can. There's a couple guys, but he's 1 or 2 wins from a top 10 guy just by the nature of the division, and that stinks for him, because the top of the division can be very scary. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the UFC match makes his next fight, because it could be a very interesting fight, or it could be, oh, thank goodness they're kind of building him up.
Outstanding. That brings us all the way to the prelims opener, where Miles Johns finished off Kevin Natividad. Was already on his way to, not a blowout, but a pretty clear-cut decision in which he won all 3 rounds. Not satisfied with that, Johns just punched him out on a break from, I think it was Johns really escaping from a takedown. They kind of briefly had hands on each other, clinched. When they broke, Johns nailed him with an uppercut, and just Natividad was gone. Mouthpiece flying, and Natividad in a heap. Did you have Johns going into this one?
I did. I had seen more of him because I've seen Natividad in the LFA as well. But I had seen John's performances, and I thought that his wrestling, actually, oddly enough, would be the thing that would get it done. I know that Kevin Natividad he's the kind of guy who will take one to give one. But he's trained by Arizona Combat Sports, so he's got a good backing. He's got good wrestling skills. That's why he kept it upright. I did not see Miles Johns getting a finish on this fight. I didn't see that happening. I didn't expect it. I thought he would. I use the term workmanlike, not as a term of disrespect, but a clear cut. Let's do it. Okay, good. Congratulations. Did good work, and let's go home. But to see him do that and land a knockout, do you remember, an audience, do you remember the early UFC video games when there was the knockout that landed and the little mouthpiece went flying? You're like, well, that doesn't happen. That's just silly that you see the big boom and the mouthpiece goes, shoo, 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 and it's that little cinematic moment. That was that cinematic moment. So that was one of those highlight reels that Miles Johns can sit on his laurels and go, that was good. So yeah,
Yes.
I'm glad about that.
And with that, we have broken down and reacted to all 11 fights from UFC Fight Night Hall versus Silva, or UFC Vegas 12, whatever you want to call it. Let us now move on to the cut list. The cut list, my co-host Jay and I can nominate fighters who should be cut. Again, not trying to pile on, not trying to be negative, but fighters being cut from the roster is how room is made for new fighters to join the roster. And in most cases, a fighter who's cut is at perfect liberty to, go to another promotion, go to a local promotion where they're from, win some fights, and make their way right back into the UFC, as Dustin Jacoby did that we were just talking about. Do you have anyone that you want to nominate for the cut list, Jay?
Yes, unfortunately for some fighters and streaking performances and historical reference, I actually have three different fighters I believe can move on to another promotion to work their way back up. So yes, I have three fighters.
And for the record, we must agree. But
Yes.
fire
Yep.
away.
First one I have, I suppose if we go by bout order from lowest to highest, from the beginning to the end, I'll go with Justin Ledet. And Justin Ledet, if he had done something different, moved a division, something along those lines to try and revitalize himself, okay. But now he's on a 4-fight losing streak with some spectacular knockouts. Hasn't really been in a fight in a long time. And that's difficult considering his first career loss was the Alexander Rakic loss, which was one of I believe, a beatdown of the year candidate where Rakic outlanded him 200 significant strikes. So yeah, Justin Ledet would be my first. And
all right.
then, oh yeah, two.
I'm on board with that one. And I tread lightly here, as Ledet is someone that it's frankly surprising I haven't met in person. But yeah, he won 3 at heavyweights. I think he may have seen the writing on the wall that he's a true tweener, because even at heavyweight, he was like a 220-pound guy. But it has not worked at light heavyweight. He's still only 32. Come get you some in Fury Fighting Championship.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah, he'll hop in and take the title that Ike Villanueva gave up to be in the UFC. There's an opening. It's funny though. There's actually room to be a tweener these days. I think it can behoove some fighters to be a 230-pound heavyweight. I think that there's some value to that. I don't think Tanner Boser is that much bigger than that. He's about to have a co-main event against Andrei Arlovski in 2020. So, maybe a move back up might just help a little bit. Who knows? And then my second name, moving up one fight, Cole Williams has only lost 2 fights. He's 0-2 in the UFC with 2 stoppage losses. So that by itself isn't always a cuttable offense. But what is a cuttable offense, he's come into both of his fights about 5 pounds heavy. And that's an issue because there's 2 things you have to do. You have to make weight and you have to fight. And if you fail at both so severely that it just doesn't look good for your resume and everything else. Now, granted, he could theoretically save his roster spot if he moved up to try at middleweight, but I don't know if he has the size or the anything that has to. He hasn't shown anything to me. I've only personally seen one of his fights outside of the UFC, and that was his last one at Chosen Few. Um, Nothing that really stood out to me as let's do it. And even though he has only 2 losses in a row, I think this could be one of those moments the UFC could say, "Oh, well, we tried. Maybe see you in a year and a half for a short notice fight."
I actually will co-sign on that one as well. The UFC will give you a long leash if you can help them make fight cards happen. I mean, we just talked about a man who just racked up his 4th straight loss at light heavyweight, but they don't tend to have much truck with people missing weight, especially missing weight badly. So yeah, Cole Williams can go get that under control.
And then the final fight is actually moving up one additional bout. The UFC, if the UFC had an international market, especially a European market, to go after, in that the UFC would host events in Europe, in Britain, in country that they could bring in fighters from the United Kingdom, this may not be the case. But considering the UFC only goes to Las Vegas or Abu Dhabi, Wales isn't a target market and the United Kingdom isn't a target market like it used to be. This is a guy in Jack Marshman who he lost a tough decision. I mean, he I don't want to say he didn't have moments in the fight, but there wasn't much of the fight that he won against Sean Strickland. He landed a couple big shots, but there was never that, oh, maybe he could win this fight feeling. And that's kind of the thing you want. I mean, he was blown out by Edmund Shabazian. He was easily tapped out by shoe-faced Antonio Carlos Jr. And the Carl Roberson fight, that it happened as well, with his lone win over our dear friend John Phillips. So I really want to see Wales on the big stage. I'm very happy when Wales can be featured on the big stage, but maybe you could be better suited to run through Cage Warriors or one of those organizations.
I have the feeling Bellator would give him a job.
Sure.
Bellator
Absolutely.
needs middleweights. Bellator likes, people from Europe. They'd take him.
But
I agree with that one as well. I mean, he's 3-5 in the UFC, and while all the people who've beaten him have been very good fighters, the ones he's beaten, I think, are all out of the UFC at this point.
Yeah, the only one I think that I don't even know what happened to Ryan James, because I think he had a 4-fight contract and he just didn't renew it because he beat Andrew Sanchez. But I think, I think you're right.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that was my exact same cut list, so I don't even have anything to add or subtract. Next item up, the Bulls and the Bears. If you are new to this show, that is a stock market reference. Bulls refers to things whose stock is going up. Bears means the stock is dropping. Each of us can name up to 3 things, but don't have to name 3. And Jay, would you like to do Bulls or Bears first?
Let's go positive, but I want you to lead off on this. I want you to give me some positivity. Feed me some positivity.
Give you some positivity. Okay, from the bottom up, and all 3 of these are pretty substantial bulls, so none of these are bad. But bull number 3 will be Bryce Mitchell. He faced I think the sternest test of his career in the opinion of just about everybody I've talked to. Again, I did not pick him to win this fight, and he won. He looked very good. He showed improving ability to get the fight to the ground, which again is always going to be the question mark when you have a grappler like him just moving into the lower reaches of contention. So stock up big time on Bryce Mitchell. Bull number 2, Factory X Muay Thai. I mean, we are just a couple years removed from them being the runner-up for Gym of the Year, probably after City Kickboxing. Just really sprang into prominence as one of the premier gyms in the sport. They, City Kickboxing, and Fortis are the 3 that have kind of sprung up in the last couple of years. But they've also had a couple of, bad nights at the office this year in the year of COVID. This was not one of them. Factory X fighters looked fantastic. Lots of people getting a hug and a kiss on the cheek from Mark Montoya tonight. Makes me happy to see it. War Factory X. Number 1, Adrian Yanez. And I feel bad because I should have snuck Sean Strickland in here for coming back and looking so good after 2 years away. But Adrian Yanez is checking off all the boxes for not just getting into the UFC, because if there's one thing we've learned this spring, summer, and fall during the era of COVID, it is that how you win and how much attention you can draw, just your narrative value, affects how you are booked very, very directly. Hamzat Chimaev is far from the only guy to show up in the UFC this year and win his first fight with a spectacular finish. There have been probably literally a couple dozen. Yanez is putting himself on that same kind of track. And while all that should matter is that he showed up on Dana White's Contender Series and knocked a dude out in 39 seconds, and then showed up in the UFC a few months later and knocked a dude out in 2.5 minutes, the rest of it matters as well when you're a company that is trying to sell fights to people. He has a story. He's winning fights in the right way at the right time. He is, as you saw, if you saw his post-fight interview, just a charming, humble, and well-spoken guy who nonetheless does not lack for confidence. That checks off all the boxes to have some star power in the UFC. And I think Adrian Yanez did his stock as much good as just about anybody who stepped into the octagon tonight. Jay, what do you got for Bulls?
I can dig it. I don't want to duplicate any of your points, so I'm going to have to go a little rogue for a minute. My first is going to be the third one, if you want to count from bottom to top. Positive, uplifting, important post-fight interviews. Because I feel like a lot of the time, a post-fight interview is a slog. It's a simple, well, you got this, yeah, I feel better, I feel stronger, whatever. There were several moments tonight in post-fight interviews where a fighter's persona, their drive, their ability to sell themselves came out. And I think that's a rare thing these days for a lot of fighters. You can see what it does lately. You look to that Chimaev guy who sold himself on his performances and then had an exciting post-fight interview. Bryce Mitchell has a habit of saying things in post-fight interviews where he may not quite shoot himself in the foot, but he'll kind of make people go, I don't want to hear him on the microphone. Didn't have that tonight. Uriah Hall's post-fight interview talking about what he said to Anderson Silva and everything like that, there's a sympathetic feeling to him and go, oh, that's really great. And Kevin Holland was, the guy, he checked the boxes that the UFC wanted to hear. An active guy, an exciting guy. He gets the finish. He's ready to fight. He has a name. So I think all in all, good, positive, stock building post-fight interviews. That's one for me, because I feel like they kind of separate the fighters somehow. If there's so many fighters, there's got to be another way to separate yourself from the pack. So I think they did. Number 2 is referee Chris Taglioni, because Taglioni had a lot of gaffes recently. He had some issues and he disappeared. Now it's possible that the UFC carried over a certain number of referees and just didn't bring him, which that's too bad unless he was reffing other local events that we're unaware of. But he came back to the UFC and refereed the first 2 fights. Both were good, dramatic stoppages. He came in at the right time. There was no controversy. And when a referee has a night and you don't really know their name, that almost is the best kind of thing you can do. Because how often do you go and Dana White in his post-fight interview press conference thing will say, man, Herb Dean was right on when he stopped that fight. No, it's going to be Herb Dean was a maniac by letting the fight go on too long and blah, 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 blah. He'll never ref a fight against Steve Mazzagatti and so on and so forth. So Chris Taglioni, he only ref 2 fights, and that's fine. Get yourself back in the rotation and get going. And of course, Keith Peterson is back too, but that's me. And my number 1, it's interesting you mentioned Factory X, because I had a similar idea with a camp, but my camp was Fortis MMA, because Fortis MMA has fallen on hard times in terms of UFC performances as of late. There have been some wins, but a lot of losses. It had really run into some difficult matchups. Fortis MMA and head coach Saif Saud started the night with a dramatic win with Miles Johns, and bookended the night with the Uriah Hall win. And I think when not only Fortis can have one of their homegrown guys have an impressive performance against a tough LFA name, a known quantity in those circles, that's a good performance. And then to have, so they have their home guy, and then they have a transplant, a hot shot coming over to hone their skills, and you can notice that he improved in certain aspects. And that was a very apparent thing for Uriah Hall. Sure, he was tentative, but when he committed to his strikes, he really committed to his strikes. The cornering advice for Saud and the rest of his corner was spectacular, talking to Hall. So I think Fortis MMA picked up the biggest win tonight.
Outstanding. Do you have any bears for us?
You know, I do, and I don't want to, but I feel that in some situations, I'm going to go with just two.
Okay.
I don't have a full three because I feel like we already touched on some that I would punish in the cut list, and I don't really want to, pile on to some of the fighters that didn't have good nights. I guess I'll go with it. My first is Andre Fili, because this was his fight to really emerge from the pack. Featherweight is, I mean, we already talked about this. Lightweight and welterweight are so stacked. Well, the next stacked division is featherweight. There are, 80, 90 fighters, 100 fighters on the roster. And this was his chance to really stand out, beat a ranked guy, and he put a performance. And unfortunately, in this performance, he showed his ceiling. And that's a tough thing to show when there's a division full of guys that can, run roughshod on other fighters like that. So I think that this was unfortunately the kind of thing where you look at Andre Fili and on paper it hurts him because he's a 9-7 UFC fighter. That also stings. But this was that one moment to break out, and he didn't. And this breaks my heart a little bit because I didn't think he had a lot of stock to lose. But I found that Anderson Silva had enough stock to lose that when he lost the way he lost after a tepid, careful, cautious performance to basically run in hands down, chin up, like Fabricio Verdum chasing after Stipe Miocic, that kind of situation, and get clipped, lose, possibly retire on a loss, and kind of make everybody sad in the arena. I mean, Uriah Hall apologized to him for knocking him out. If that says how you feel about everything, when the fighter that knocks you out apologized for having done so because he is so beloved, and Anderson Silva has won one fight since 2012, and even though winning one against a top 10 guy wouldn't have been it, a lot of people had him as a sentimental favorite, even if he was a betting underdog. And unfortunately, this puts him in a position where we at the beginning of this the beginning of this broadcast, we talked about what do we do with him, and that's not a position you want to have with Anderson Silva.
No.
And I feel that his stock unfortunately went down here.
All right, some of mine overlapped yours, so I won't reiterate them. The only unique one I have is, and again, makes me feel bad. These always make me feel bad.
Yeah.
Kevin Natividad.
Okay.
It is the flip side of what I said about Adrian Yanez, because, you only get one chance to make a first impression. Not only whether or not you win, but how you win or lose does matter. And for the same reason that it is a good thing for Miles Johns to have in his pocket that, okay, he didn't just win a 30-27 decision in that curtain jerker. He authored a knockout that'll be on his highlight reel for, however long he's in the UFC. The opposite side of that coin goes to Natividad. I favor Johns in this fight. So did the bookies, but not by much. This was a close fight on the odds. Natividad he brought weapons to this. I expected this to be closer even before the knockout happened, but it was pretty much just a washout for 2.5 rounds, and then it was a brutal knockout that got the night started for us. So his stock does take a bit of a hit, but obviously he'll have chances to redeem that. Jay,
I can take that.
What letter grade do you give to this card?
You have to weigh whether you want to be objective in giving a letter grade versus the feeling, the subjective feelings you have, the fighters that, okay, even as media members, sometimes we become fans and we can't quite keep the fan behind us. And as somebody who has been following the sport since, the very beginning of the sport, pretty much, and seeing all the things that we've seen and seeing Anderson Silva go out like that, it shouldn't hurt the card when the guy that does it relatively spectacularly knocks him out. But even that, I feel like it does put a slight damper on the card for me to knock it down. And then other fighters who, you question whether they should be in the UFC or not, get wins, and you go, well, that's I guess we're going to have to keep doing this. All that to say, probably about a B+, because the action was superb. The prelims were excellent. I couldn't. One of my friends who follows the sport a little less crazy than most of us do will sometimes ask what fights that he should watch, what fights he should skip. I don't think I could say you probably can pass up this fight on this card. And that said, I give it a B+, because while there aren't any fights that you can say, oh, skip that, it's a 3-round lay and pray, you can not worry about it. There's only a couple that are really like, you have to see that fight. You have to see this result. And there were spectacular knockouts and confusing things, and Kevin Holland in the slam. But there wasn't a fight of the night. I guess maybe Strickland versus Marshman, I guess, if you had to pick something like that. But even then, it doesn't really resonate. So I think in lieu of a fight of the night or whatever, I think that knocks it down to a B+ for me.
That sounds good to me. I would give it a B. Mm-hmm. Just pretty low stakes, all things considered. We talked about how few top 10, top 15 fighters there were on the card. I mean, basically about the same number that there were on the Bellator card 2 nights ago.
That's correct.
And some fantastic finishes. One bad decision where it's not a complete robbery that I'm just going to be fuming about it all weekend, but one that'll just be kind of like a pebble in my shoe whenever I look at those guys' records from now on. So I'll give it a B. Good night of fine family fun. That does it for the Sherdog Radio Network breakdown of UFC Fight Night 181, Hall versus Silva. My usual co-host, Keith Schillen, and I should be back with a preview show ahead of next week's card. We're going to start doing those on a more regular basis, and then most definitely with the recap next Saturday night. Until then, for Jay Pettry, I'm Ben Duffy. You can find us both on Twitter, at Jay Pettry, at Benjamin Duffy. You can find us both on the front page of Sherdog.com. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.